I never should have stayed so deep into the Adirondacks that night. I was wishing I'd turned back hours ago. I'd driven in late, tired from a week of long shifts, and I wanted nothing more than to set up my small tent and just disappear. By the time I reached, the rain started lightly at first, drumming on the tent's fabric like a nervous heartbeat. Then came the first true clap of thunder. I swear I could feel it rattle my teeth. I crawled inside the tent and tried to settle in, but the storm was violent. Rain fell in sheets, pounding the canopy above me. It wasn't just a storm, it was a force, a presence, a thing that made me small, scared, and exposed. My chest tightened, and I froze, listening. The storm was so loud. But I thought I was safe in my tent. I tried to focus on setting up my sleeping bag, tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the hair on my arms refused to lie down later in the middle of the night. I tried to peek outside, and there, I saw a figure. Or at least, I think I saw him. Through a gap in the trees, a figure standing there, hood pulled low, head down, shoulders hunched against the rain. I just blinked and tried to see more clearly, and he was gone. The storm got worse. The rain drove into the tent at an angle I didn't think was possible, soaking my clothes through the thin fabric. I tried to calm myself, telling myself to wait it out. I was exhausted, drenched, and I had nowhere else to go. I don't know how long I stayed frozen in that tent. The storm didn't stop. Panic set in. I had to get out. I grabbed my flashlight and my pack, hesitated only for a second, then ran. Rain hammered my face. I ran blindly toward higher ground, toward the main trail I had scouted earlier. I didn't look back at first. I dared not. But then I caught a glimpse of them. 3 hooded figures standing at the edge of the clearing, just watching. I stumbled through the mud, slipping, nearly falling several times. But I ran, desperate, thinking they would catch me if I stopped. I reached the small road I had driven in on, barely visible through the rain. And there it was. A car, parked sideways in the floodwater that had begun to gather along the low points. I thought it was someone else seeking shelter, but the headlights were off, the engine cold. The rain poured over it like it had been abandoned for hours. I didn't wait to see more. I jumped in my car and floored it, trying to get out of the storm and away from whatever had been out there later. I reached the main highway and called the police. My mind was a mess. My teeth chattered, my fingers barely held the phone, and I could barely speak. They arrived eventually, hours later, after the storm had passed. When we returned to the site, the car was still there, abandoned by the rising floodwater. A check on the plates revealed it had been stolen months earlier from a dealership hundreds of miles away. The figures themselves were gone, vanished into the forest. I don't know what they wanted that night. I don't know why they followed me into the storm, or why they didn't attack, or why they just waited, watching. I will never forget that night, honestly. It happened when I was just 16. We'd decided to go camping deep in the northern woods of Vermont, somewhere far enough from the nearest road. It was late August, and summer storms were unpredictable there, sometimes sudden, violent, and enough to make you question why you'd ever left your warm bed. We had set up our tents in a small clearing. The forest was dense, almost claustrophobic, and the ground was damp from earlier rain showers. I'd always loved thunderstorms, even as a kid. But that night was different. There was a heaviness in the air. I had just finished helping with the last of the firewood when the first rumbles of thunder rolled through the valley, followed by the deep, vibrating crack that made my teeth rattle. Most of the others stayed near the fire, trying to talk over the storm. But I had this instinct to step away, to watch the storm in the clearing while the wind whipped through the trees, I walked a few dozen feet from the tents. The rain began in earnest, sharp drops stinging my arms and soaking through my jacket almost instantly. Lightning lit the clearing in blinding bursts, followed by thunder. That's when I saw a figure. A man, tall, wearing a gray hoodie, standing still at the far edge of the clearing near the tree line. The rain plastered his hoodie to his body, and I could barely make out his features in the darkness. I froze. My stomach twisted. He just stood there. "Who's there?" I shouted, louder, but he didn't answer. And then, in that perfect moment of lightning, I saw a grin, a wide, unnatural smile. Just for a split second before he disappeared behind a tree, I stumbled back, tripping over a root. I ran back to the tents, drenched, my chest heaving. One of the others noticed immediately. "You okay?" A voice called from under the tarp. "Yeah," I muttered, trying to calm my racing heart. It's the storm." As night fell fully, the storm grew worse. I lay awake on my sleeping pad, listening to the storm. Later in the night, I heard a soft scraping sound against the side of my tent. My breath caught in my throat. I thought it was a branch hitting the fabric, but then I heard it again. "Hey, you forgot something." I froze. My eyes darted toward the tent wall. "Who's there?" I called. No answer. Just silence. I wanted to wake the others, but something in me held back. Minutes passed. I had no sense of time. Then the voice came again, clearer this time. "You should leave now." I swallowed hard. "What do you want?" I asked, my teeth chattering. "Just to remind you." I jumped up, flashlight in my hand, but in my panic, I dropped it. The beam rolled across the wet ground, but no one was there. My stomach turned over. The storm's lightning revealed nothing. He was gone. I decided I had to move. I crawled out of my tent and made my way toward the fire, which the others had desperately tried to keep alive despite the rain. Hours passed like this. Every flash of lightning made my heart skip. I never dared move too far from the fire. At some point, I couldn't take it anymore. I crawled into my tent, zipped it shut, and tried to pretend I was asleep. But the storm didn't let me forget. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, just beyond the tent walls. And then the whisper, right next to my ear. "Did you really forget?" I didn't answer. The voice faded with the wind, leaving me shaking, soaked, and unable to breathe normally. Eventually, the storm passed. The sky lightened to a muted gray, and the rain slowed to a drizzle. I peeked out of the tent, but there was no one, no sign he had ever been there. The forest looked almost normal again. I never saw him again, never heard another whisper. But that night was worst, the feeling of being watched in the storm. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I do know that in those woods during that storm, the darkness didn't just hide the forest, it hid him. And that was far more terrifying than the storm itself. I had been driving for hours, following the signs to a small, secluded campsite located into a hollow deep in the Allegheny Mountains of Pennsylvania. Later I arrived. The sun was already dipping. I parked on a patch of flattened grass near the edge of a clearing and began unloading my gear. My little two-person tent went up quickly. I chose a spot slightly elevated, hoping it would stay dry when the storm rolled in. Mist was already curling between the trees, giving the forest an otherworldly glow. I paused for a moment, catching my breath, when the first low rumbles of thunder rolled through the ridges. The wind stirred the leaves above, making the trees groan. I settled my gear inside the tent. The rain started. First a light drizzle, then quickly escalating into a steady downpour. That's when I remembered why I had always sought out storms like this. Despite the danger, despite the isolation, there was something about watching a storm up close. The way lightning tore across the sky, illuminating everything in harsh, white light that made me feel alive. I zipped up the tent flap and crawled into my sleeping bag, leaving the lantern lit on a small hook. Then the first odd sound came. A sharp clatter. My lantern had tipped over. I froze for a second, but when I reached for it, it was already on the floor, and suddenly I heard a rushing, splashing sound, like water running along the tent walls, inside the fabric itself. My pulse quickened. I unzipped the flap to investigate, expecting wind and rain to be the cause. But what I saw made my stomach drop. One side of the tent had been open, the storm's wind whipping the canvas violently, letting rainwater spill in and soak my sleeping bag and gear. My first thought was disbelief. I would never have left it open, and the wind alone didn't seem strong enough to have done this. My chest tightened, and a shiver ran through me. Something felt off. I stepped out into the mud, trying to zip the flap closed, but the wind resisted, tearing at the fabric. I thought it was the wind, branches snapping. But no, it was deliberate. Someone or something was moving along the forest floor nearby. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I crouched low, clutching my flashlight, and tried to peer through the sheets of rain. The storm made it hard to see clearly. I wasn't sure. I grabbed my gear, trying to move quietly, hoping whoever or whatever it was wouldn't notice me. The wind tore at my tent again, and I realized the intruder must have tried the flap. Whoever it was had almost gotten in. Then, just as I slung the bag over my shoulder, I heard a sprint along the trail leading into the clearing. My breath caught, my legs nearly froze, but instinct took over. I ran. Lightning flashed, lighting up the trees around me in stark white. In that moment, I saw a figure, tall, hunched under a hood. I reached my car, soaked and trembling. Behind me, I thought I heard the crunch of leaves again. I slammed the door, locked it, and called 911. When the police arrived, the clearing was empty. The tent flap had been torn, the gear soaked, but nothing else. They told me it was possible someone had approached the campsite and then hidden nearby, perhaps waiting until I fell asleep. I can't shake the memory of that night. That night, the forest wasn't alive in beauty. It was alive in terror. Back in 2016, my husband and I decided to go on a camping trip deep in the forests of eastern Pennsylvania. We weren't looking for a typical campsite with showers and paved spots. No, we wanted raw, primitive isolation, somewhere far from anyone else, far from roads. So we found an area on state forest land where camping was free, completely undeveloped. The road in was barely a trail, thick with mud and ruts from who knows how many vehicles before us, and there was zero cell service. According to the map, we were miles from the nearest town. I remember a chill running down my spine, though it wasn't just from the cold drizzle starting to fall. That's when we saw the first of the two people who would haunt the memory of this trip. She was standing next to an old pickup truck, hood popped open, motionless. Normally, my husband is the kind of guy who stops for anyone. He's handy, keeps jumper cables and tools in his trunk. But this time, he just slowed slightly, gave her a long look, and drove past. But he didn't stop. We kept driving for hours. Later, we found a small clearing that looked just dry enough to pitch our tent. The rain had soaked everything, turning the ground into a slick mess of mud and fallen leaves. But we found a slightly higher patch and set up camp. And that's when it started. The first truly unsettling encounter. A beat-up blue sedan crawled past us, slow, deliberate, like it was trying not to be noticed. The road didn't lead anywhere, only deeper into the woods. But 10 minutes later, the car returned, slowly cruising by again. The driver was a middle-aged man with a thick beard, staring straight at us, just that cold, unblinking stare. Then, 15 minutes later, he passed again, into the woods, back and forth like some pacing its territory. My husband's jaw tightened. No camping gear, no real reason to be there. Something about this isn't right, he muttered. I wanted to rationalize it. Maybe a local hunter, maybe a weird guy. But the pit in my stomach refused to let me forget. Around midnight, the storm came alive. The wind screamed through the trees. Lightning split the clouds, illuminating our tiny tent in harsh, ghostly flashes. And then, around 3 a.m., it happened. I woke to the loudest, most unnatural sound I've ever heard in my life. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the wind. My husband shot upright in his sleeping bag, peering out through the thin mesh window. The woods were silent again, save for the storm. But the sound had been close, terrifyingly close. "Get dressed," he said, leaving no room for argument. My hands shook as I pulled on jeans over my pajamas. He tore the plastic off the machete we'd brought for the trip, gripping it tightly. "Stay close," he whispered. We burst out of the tent. The storm hammered us, mud sucking at our boots. The clearing looked empty. Too empty. My eyes darted to every shadow, and then I saw a soda can standing upright next to our fire pit. We hadn't brought one. Someone had been there watching us sleep. We threw our gear into the car, boots slipping in the mud, and drove away. Later, about 50 miles drive, my husband finally let himself breathe. He admitted the noise hadn't been miles away. It had been within 50 feet of our tent. Whoever, or whatever, was out there had been close enough to see us. We never saw the blue car or the broken-down truck again. We were shaken, terrified, but alive. After that night, we stick to state parks with rangers, other campers, anything that keeps the darkness and whatever hides in it at bay.